I've been a cop for 15 years, and I've never told anybody the full story of what happened at Two Lights. My name's Emily Carter, Sergeant with the Cape Elizabeth Sheriff's Office up here in Maine, and what I'm about to share with you, most people would think I'm crazy. I mean that literally. They'd think I'd lost my mind. But I was there. I saw it with my own eyes, and I watched my partner experience the exact same thing at the exact same time. So if we both imagined it, then we need to figure out what kind of coincidence that is, because I don't believe in those kinds of coincidences anymore. This coast up here is isolated as hell, man. The fog rolls in thick enough that you can't see your hand in front of your face, and when night falls, it feels like you're on the edge of the world. In the fall of 2022, something happened out at the old Two Lights lighthouse that changed how I see reality, and I'm finally ready to talk about it. What happened there shouldn't have been possible, but it was, and the worst part is knowing that it's still happening. We got a call from one of the local fishermen, genuine guy, not the type to make stuff up or waste our time. He said that the night before, he'd seen a light flashing from inside the old lighthouse, the one that's been closed and abandoned for 50 years, just sitting out there on those dangerous cliffs getting battered by the ocean. But here's the thing that got me interested. He didn't just see a light. He heard something, a rhythmic banging sound, like a bell being struck, coming from deep inside the structure, echoing out across the water. Now, the lighthouse is supposed to be locked up tight, no access, nothing. The foundation is all crumbling stone perched on a cliff that drops straight down into the Atlantic. One wrong step, and you're falling 100 feet into rocks and water. Jimmy Brooks, that's my partner, solid guy, been doing this job almost as long as I have. He looked at me when I told him about the call and just said, "Yeah, that's probably nothing. Probably kids or the wind or something." But I had this feeling, that gut thing you get after years on the job. So we drove out there anyway, and I'm really glad we did, because what we found, well, that's when everything stopped making sense. The lighthouse base was a wreck of rust and decay, and when we got to the iron door at ground level, it was definitely broken open, but not recently. The rust on the hinges was thick, like it had been that way for months, maybe longer. The smell hit us first when we stepped inside, that mix of salt water, mold, and something else, something sweet and rotten at the same time, almost metallic. It was the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and your hair and doesn't wash out for days. The iron spiral staircase inside went up and up and up, and I mean it just kept going. My legs were burning by the time we reached the top, and when we finally got to the lantern chamber, where the old light used to be, there was absolutely nothing there. No signs of life, no equipment, no evidence that anybody had been there recently. But that's when Jimmy stopped dead and started staring at the stone walls. The entire interior surface was covered in deep scratches. Gouges really, like somebody had gone absolutely crazy trying to claw their way out of there. The stone was pale where it had been scraped away, and the scratches went up and down, back and forth, in these chaotic patterns that made your stomach turn just looking at them. "This is old, Emily," Jimmy said, his voice kind of shaky. "This is like decades old." And he was right. The discoloration of the exposed stone showed they weren't fresh. But here's what got to us, the dust on the floor. It was thick, undisturbed dust, years of accumulation, except for one thing. There was a clear line through it, like something heavy had been dragged from one of the walls over to a small hatch that led down to the foundation level. That dust line was fresh. Real fresh. We opened that hatch, and I'm not gonna lie, I didn't want to go down there. Something about that opening just felt wrong. Felt like we were crossing a line we shouldn't cross. But we did anyway because we're cops, and that's what you do. My tactical flashlight cut through the darkness, and what we saw down there in that foundation chamber was impossible. It was a small basement, maybe 12 feet across, and the floor and walls were packed with sand and sea mud. But in the middle of the room, completely dry, and I mean bone dry, no moisture at all, sat a single object. It was an old ship's registry, some kind of nautical log book, wrapped in weathered canvas sailcloth that should have been deteriorated but looked almost preserved. When I opened it, my hands were literally shaking. The pages were damp but still readable, and they were all dated, entries going back to 1903. The handwriting got progressively more unhinged as the dates got closer to December of that year. "They come through the water," one entry read. "The bell will not stop." Why will the bell not stop? And then in the final entry, the handwriting was barely legible, almost carved into the paper with the force of the pen. "I am still here. I am still here. I am still here." Repeated over and over again until it just turned into scratches on the page. The moment I read that last line, we heard it. Not loud, not obvious, but distinctly, that sound the fisherman had reported. A single bell toll, deep and resonant, coming from inside the stone itself. And then underneath it, this sound like the ocean was rushing up from below us, like something massive was moving through the water directly beneath the foundation. Jimmy looked at me, and I could see the absolute terror in his eyes because he heard it too. We didn't say anything. We just ran. We bolted back up those spiral stairs so fast I thought we'd fall. And when we made it back to ground level and got outside into the fresh air, we were both shaking. We didn't even talk about going back down. But here's the thing that haunts me. When we went back to search the foundation chamber the next day with backup and equipment, the hatch was sealed shut. Like professionally sealed, with rust that suggested it had been locked for decades. We opened it again, and the entire floor was flooded with seawater. Not the dry spot where the book had been, just gone. The book was gone. The only proof we had was the dampness on our clothes and the memory of what we'd read. Jimmy requested a transfer 2 weeks later. He works inland now, won't go anywhere near the coast after dark. Me, I stayed because this is my town, but I'll never forget that sound. That single bell toll echoing up through the stone. Because I know now that Silas Stone, the lighthouse keeper from 1903, never stopped ringing that bell. He's still down there, still ringing it, and he's not alone in that water. I'm not going to tell you my name. I've learned the hard way that it's better when people don't know who I am, and I'm sure as hell not going to get identified with this story because nobody's going to believe it anyway, and I don't need the hassle. What I will tell you is that I was a state police trooper in Montana, working the night shift on Highway 93, which is basically a long, dark stretch of asphalt that cuts right through the Rocky Mountains and feels like you're driving through the middle of nowhere. And that's because you are. You go hours without seeing another car, just you and the darkness and the trees going on forever. This happened in the summer of 2019, but I remember it being unusually cold that night, even for those mountains. The kind of cold that makes you feel watched, if that even makes sense. I'm telling you this now because I'm done keeping it to myself, and because there's probably other people out there who've experienced something similar and think they're crazy. You're not crazy. I know what I saw, and I'm trained to observe details, to remember facts, to reconstruct crime scenes. Everything I'm about to describe happened exactly the way I'm telling you, and I've got incident reports that back it up, even if the official explanation is complete garbage. The call came in at 3 a.m, which is already the worst possible time for anything. Dispatch said there was an abandoned vehicle on Highway 93, somewhere around 15 miles south of Missoula, in the National Forest area, where cell service is basically non-existent. Motor still running, emergency flashers going, no sign of the driver. I was maybe 10 minutes away, so I headed out. The highway was completely empty, just my cruiser and the darkness and the headlights cutting through the fog that was rolling off the mountains. When I found the vehicle, it was exactly how Dispatch described it. A newer SUV, maybe 2 years old, pristine condition, everything still running. Through the windows, I could see the keys in the ignition, a wallet and a cell phone on the center console, everything neat and organized. The driver's door was still open, which was weird because it suggested he got out on his own, not like something had taken him. But here's where it gets strange. On the shoulder, on the packed dirt, I found tracks. Not tire tracks, not footprints from hiking boots. These were different. They were deep impressions, really deep, like something heavy had made them, but the shape was wrong. For separate imprints, massive, with what looked like claw marks, thin, elongated, splayed out at angles that didn't match anything I knew. They looked like they came from something that walked on 2 legs, something reptilian, something big. I mean really big. The stride was long, maybe 6 feet between steps, and the depth of the impressions suggested something weighing at least 400 pounds, maybe more. The tracks led away from the SUV, straight into the dense forest, and I followed them with my flashlight, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. After about 20 meters, maybe a little more, the tracks just stopped, like whatever made them had simply vanished. But where they ended, I found something that made my stomach drop. It was a motorcycle helmet, brand new, expensive gear, completely out of place out here in the middle of nowhere. The thing was cracked open, and it was covered in this dark, thick substance that smelled like nothing I'd ever encountered before, sharp, musky animal. My partner, Trooper Greg Stevens, showed up maybe 5 minutes later, and when I showed him the tracks, he tried to rationalize it. Big animal, maybe an injured elk, he said, but his voice was shaky, and I could tell he didn't believe it either. We both pointed our tactical flashlights into the forest, and there was just this complete, total silence. No insects, no wind, nothing. Just dead quiet. Then Greg screamed. I mean actually screamed and stumbled backward, his light beam swinging upward into the canopy. And when I followed his light, I saw it. 10 meters up, clinging to the side of a massive pine tree, was what was left of the vehicle's owner. The body was naked, torn up with these deep, jagged wounds all across the arms and chest, and it was just hanging there, draped sideways against the trunk like it had been placed there deliberately, like it was being displayed. While we're standing there, trying to process what we're seeing, trying to figure out how a body ends up in a tree 20 feet in the air, I heard something. Not from the forest, not from above, but from behind me. It was coming from the open trunk of the SUV. A low, guttural roar, like nothing that comes from any animal I know, followed by this fast, clicking sound, like something was hissing or clicking its teeth together really rapidly. My instinct kicked in, and I went for my weapon, running toward the trunk, but Greg grabbed me and pulled me back hard. "Don't," he said. "Don't look at it." And that's when I saw movement. Something was rising up from inside that trunk. It was tall, its skin looked wet and gray, covered in some kind of fluid or slime, and when the beam of my flashlight hit its face, I saw the eyes. Yellow eyes, glowing like nothing natural, and teeth that caught the light and reflected it back at me. It was like looking at a predator that had no business existing in our world. The thing reached down with this long, claw-tipped arm and grabbed that motorcycle helmet off the ground, and it squeezed it, crushed it in its hand like the plastic was nothing. Then, and I swear this is exactly what happened, it moved. Not walked, not ran. It moved with this kind of sideways, inhuman motion, and it disappeared into the forest without even snapping a branch. The speed was impossible. We're talking faster than anything that size should be able to move. The whole scene got locked down as a crime scene, obviously. State forensics showed up, FBI got involved because it was a homicide, but here's the thing. The DNA they pulled off the helmet and from underneath the victim's fingernails didn't match anything in any database. Not human, not bear, not elk, nothing. The official report lists it as a death caused by an unidentified large predator, and the case is just sitting there in the cold case files, gathering dust. But I know what I saw. I know that thing was intelligent, that it was watching us, that it understood what we were doing when we were pointing our lights and reaching for our weapons. On my last day working that route, before I requested a transfer inland, I drove past the memorial they set up for the guy. There's a small cross there now, and on the asphalt of the shoulder, if you know where to look and you're paying attention, you can still make out those 4 claw marks in the pavement, faint but there, indented into the concrete. And every single time I pass a dark stretch of road at night, every time the forest closes in, I remember those yellow eyes and that click-click-clicking sound. And I wonder how many other people have seen it. How many other cars have broken down on empty highways late at night? How many other people know what's really out there in those mountains, watching from the darkness? Listen, I know this sounds insane. I know exactly how it sounds. But I've been a correctional officer for over a decade now, and I've learned not to question what I see anymore. That night changed everything for me, man. Everything. It was around 2:30 in the morning on Route 93, Nevada, out near the perimeter of the state facility where I work. I was doing my usual rounds, patrolling the fence line, just another boring night shift like 1,000 others before it. The desert was dead quiet, like it always is out there. No traffic, no lights except mine cutting through the darkness. I was literally on autopilot, just driving, checking the gates, making sure nothing was broken into or out. But then I saw this light, this weird yellowish neon glow that shouldn't have been there. At first, I thought maybe it was a reflection or something, but as I got closer, I realized it was coming from this old phone booth. An actual metal and glass phone booth, the kind you don't see anymore. It was completely abandoned, boarded up for years according to the maintenance logs I checked later. But that night, that thing was lit up like a Christmas tree. The fluorescent inside was flickering, on and off, like something was playing with it. My gut was screaming at me to keep driving, to just ignore it and move on. But I didn't. That's the part that haunts me every single day. I slowed down and pulled over, and I remember the desert got even colder somehow. Like the temperature just dropped 20 degrees in a second. I stepped out of the patrol car, and that's when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor of that phone booth, just sitting there like she belonged there, like she'd been waiting for me specifically. She was maybe 8 years old, wearing this dirty, tattered winter coat that looked like it hadn't been washed in forever. Her hair was all matted and tangled, and she was holding this stuffed bear, just squeezing it against her chest. The bear was falling apart, literally coming undone at the seams. I remember thinking how cold she must have been, sitting in that metal box in the middle of the Nevada desert. I approached slowly, talking calm like I do with the inmates when they get agitated. "Hey there, sweetheart. You lost? Where's your mom?" And that's when she looked up at me. Her eyes were wrong. They were completely milky white, almost opaque, and they were huge, taking up like half her face. But the worst part was that they weren't looking at me. They were looking through me like she could see something behind me, or behind everything. Her voice came out as a whisper, but I swear to God it wasn't coming from her mouth. It was in my head, in my actual head. She whispered, "Silas won't let me go. He says I have to stay. He says I'm his now." My whole body went ice cold, and not from the desert air. Something was fundamentally wrong about this situation, about this kid, about that whole scene. But I'm trained to stay calm, to help people who need help. So I told her to come with me, that I'd get her somewhere warm and safe. She stood up without a word and walked out of that booth like she was in some kind of trance. I put her in the back of my patrol car, and the entire ride back to the facility, she didn't say another word. She just sat there, hugging that falling apart teddy bear, staring out the window at nothing. I tried asking her questions, kept it gentle. "What's your name, honey?" She answered in that same whisper that isn't a whisper voice. "I'm Lily. Lily Peterson. I've been waiting a long time for someone to see me." Something about her tone, about the finality of those words, made my skin crawl. I keep my eyes on the road, trying to process what's happening. We're only a few minutes from the facility now. I can see the security gate in my headlights. I start reaching back to open her door, to help her out, and I turn around. And the back seat is completely empty. Not a trace. No kid, no bear, nothing. Just empty leather seats and the smell of dirt and something else I can't describe. Something ancient. I hit the brakes so hard I almost drove into the fence. My heart was pounding so fast I thought I was having a heart attack. I checked the front, the sides, even popped the trunk. Nothing. She was gone. Just gone. The next morning, I couldn't sleep, obviously. I went straight to the archives in the station, the old filing cabinets with all the cold cases and missing persons reports. I don't even know why I was looking, but I was drawn to them like something was pulling me there. And I found her. I found her file. Lily Marie Peterson, disappeared 2004, age 7 at the time, last seen at a phone booth on Route 93. The case file said she vanished without a trace, and it got connected to this security guard who used to work at our facility. The file called him the grave digger. His real name was Silas Thorne. He worked maintenance and cemetery upkeep for the prison grounds. Apparently, he had this obsession with death, with keeping things still and quiet, and he reportedly had a lot of young people go missing around the time he worked here. They never proved anything, but the connection was too strong to ignore. One day, Silas just disappeared. Vanished just like Lily did. But here's the thing that's going to sound crazy. I found Silas's old employment photo in the archives. I was reading through the file, and there was a picture of him from his hire date in 1998. I pulled out my phone and compared it to security footage from that night. The footage showed someone standing outside the phone booth, waiting. A man in old-fashioned clothes, with hollow eyes and a shovel in his hands. The footage was from 2004, but the timestamp on my car's recording system said it was from that night. Every single night now, when I'm driving that route, I see that phone booth in my mirrors. The light is always on, flickering that same yellow neon. And sometimes, if I look long enough, I can see her silhouette inside, always sitting, always waiting. I still have her stuffed bear. It's in my locker at work. I don't know why I took it from the car, but I couldn't leave it behind. Sometimes I open that locker, and the bear is in a different position than I left it. Sometimes there's dirt on it that wasn't there before. And sometimes, at 2:30 in the morning, I get calls on my personal phone from the phone booth's number. The old deactivated number. No one ever speaks on the line, just breathing and the sound of a child crying, real faint, like she's far away. I've reported all of this to my supervisor, to other officers, but they all think I'm losing it. Maybe I am, but I know what I saw that night. Silas never left. He's still out there on Route 93, and he's still collecting people, still waiting in that phone booth. And Lily, that poor little girl, she's still trapped there with him. She's still calling for help. And every time I drive past that booth and see that light flicker, I know she's trying to reach out to me again, trying to tell me she's still alive in there somehow, still waiting for someone brave enough to go back in and get her out. I'm writing this now, because I don't know how much longer I can do this job. I don't know how much longer I can drive that route knowing what's waiting for me. The bear is still in my locker. The phone still rings at 2:30. And that light, it never stops flickering. Some nights, I swear I can hear Silas's voice on the phone line, telling me that I should have left her alone, that I shouldn't have interfered, that now he's marked me as his next guardian. Now I understand what Lily meant when she said Silas wouldn't let her go. He doesn't just keep the people he takes. He keeps the people who see them. He keeps the witnesses. And I don't think I'm ever getting out of this. I think maybe I'm already gone, just like Lily, just like everyone else who's ever looked into that phone booth and seen what's waiting on the other side. If you're reading this and you work that route, if you ever see that booth with the light on, for God's sake, don't stop. Don't look inside. Don't try to help. Because once you see him, once you know he's real, he owns you. And you'll be spending the rest of your life wondering if you're actually still driving that desert, or if you died a long time ago and you're just stuck repeating this same night over and over again. I'm still shaking as I write this, and I know I probably should have stayed quiet about what happened out there. But people need to know what's in those woods. People need to know what's been taking the hikers. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a firefighter and rescue specialist for 14 years. I've seen some seriously messed up stuff, car accidents, house fires, people at their absolute worst moments. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in Redwood Creek, California, 2 months ago. We got called out for a complex rescue operation after a series of hikers went missing in the area, just vanished without a trace. We're talking about people who had GPS, satellite phones, the whole 9 yards, and they just disappeared like they never existed. The authorities brought in our unit because we're trained for deep wilderness operations, and they needed experienced people who could handle the terrain. We had Corporal Harris and Sergeant Miller with us, both veterans of mountain rescue, both guys I'd worked with a dozen times before. They were solid dudes, the kind of people you trust with your life. We also brought on a native guide, older guy named Tom, who knew those woods better than anyone. He tried to warn us before we even started hiking. He kept saying things like, "If you hear something close but you can't see nothing, just keep moving forward. Don't stop. Don't turn around." I didn't think much of it at the time, figured he was just being cautious, trying to scare the newbies. But as we got deeper into those redwoods, as the canopy got thicker and the light started disappearing, I realized Tom wasn't being dramatic. He was being serious. Deadly serious. We'd been trekking for about 8 hours when Corporal Harris suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. We all froze because Harris doesn't stop for nothing. That guy's like a machine. But he was staring at this massive redwood tree, like a colossal thing that had to be at least 1,000 years old. And on the trunk, carved deep into the bark, was this symbol. A circle with thin lines radiating out from the center, like a pupil or a claw, or some combination of both. It was fresh-looking too, not old or weathered. Like something had etched it there recently. Harris turned to me with this look in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Legitimate terror. He whispered, "We need to mark our path and move faster." Tom, our guide, he just nodded like he already knew what that symbol meant. He didn't explain it, didn't try to comfort us, just kept moving forward. The whole atmosphere started changing after that. The air got heavy, like it was pressing down on us. And the sound completely disappeared. You ever been in a forest? There's always noise. Birds, insects, leaves rustling, small animals moving around. But this was different. This was silence. Complete, absolute, unnatural silence. It was like the forest itself had stopped breathing, like everything alive in there had just frozen and was waiting for something. That silence was louder than any noise I've ever heard, if that makes sense. It was oppressive. It made my skin crawl. I looked over at Miller, and I could see him checking his rifle, making sure it was loaded. Even though we all knew bullets probably wouldn't help us out here. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick, deliberate. Like something was walking around our camp, circling us, but it was fast. Not running, just moving with purpose. But here's the thing. Whatever was making those sounds wasn't breaking branches, wasn't crushing leaves, wasn't making the normal noise something would make when moving through dense forest. It was like the thing was weightless, like a ghost moving through the trees. We could hear it clearly, but we couldn't see anything. Harris turned his flashlight on and swept it in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Just darkness and more trees. The footsteps just kept going, faster now, circling tighter and tighter. Tom was whispering, "Don't shine your light. Don't shine your light. Don't look at it. But Harris, he was panicking now. He was shining that light everywhere, trying to catch whatever it was. And that's when the sound changed. That's when everything went absolutely insane. This noise started happening, this high-pitched whistling sound, like someone blowing through a crack in a door, but multiplied by 1,000. It was coming from everywhere at once, above us, below us, all around us. The sound was doing something to my nervous system, making my teeth hurt, making my eyes water. Harris started screaming, but it wasn't screaming like normal. His voice sounded like it was coming from underground, from deep beneath the forest floor. He was saying, "It's the one who walks without sound. It's marked me. It's marked all of us." His eyes were wide and wild, and he was speaking in this language I didn't recognize, these guttural sounds that didn't sound human. Like he was reciting something ancient, something that had been locked away in his mind his whole life, and was just now being forced out. I did what Tom had told me to do in that moment of absolute panic. I turned off my flashlight and plunged myself into complete darkness. I couldn't see anything, not even my own hand in front of my face. The darkness out there in those woods was total, suffocating, like it had weight and texture. I could hear Miller breathing next to me, sharp and fast, like he was about to have a heart attack. The whistling sound kept going, and Harris kept screaming in that inhuman voice, but at least I couldn't see whatever was out there. And sometimes, when you can't see the monster, you can almost convince yourself it's not real. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 or 10 minutes. Then the sound stopped. Everything just went silent again. Peaceful almost. I turned my light back on slowly, and Harris was crumpled on the ground, passed out cold. And on his neck, on his skin, were 3 deep marks, parallel lines running down the side of his throat. They weren't cuts exactly, more like something had burned him with cold or heat. I couldn't tell which. The marks were perfectly parallel, like they'd been made by 3 fingers or 3 claws, and they were cauterized somehow, sealed shut. There was no blood, which made it worse. It was like whatever touched him had sealed the wound immediately. We got Harris on a stretcher and started moving out, but that's when we realized something was seriously wrong. The trail we'd used to come in, the path we'd clearly marked with tape and GPS coordinates, it was just gone. We couldn't find it anywhere. We were completely disoriented, and the forest seemed to be actively preventing us from leaving. That's when Miller spotted something on the wet ground. A boot print. Military-style boot, identical to ours, but here's the thing, it was facing the wrong direction. Not backwards exactly, but twisted like someone had walked on the side of their foot or something. And the direction it was pointing toward where we were about to go, toward a part of the forest we hadn't explored yet. Tom looked at that print and just shook his head. He said, "It knows where we're going before we get there." We eventually found our way out, used our compasses and the stars, but it took us twice as long as it should have. When we got Harris to the hospital, the doctors couldn't explain the marks on his neck. They ran every test, called in specialists, but nobody had ever seen anything like it. Harris woke up 3 days later, and he was different. Broken. He wouldn't talk about what happened that night. He just stared at the wall and whispered that name over and over. The one who walks without sound. A week later, he checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice. I tried to visit him, but he wouldn't see me. His apartment was empty within a month. I don't know where he went, but I know he's not coming back. As for me, I still hear that whistle sometimes, especially on quiet nights. I still feel that presence in the back of my mind, like something ancient and patient marked me out there, and it's just waiting for me to go back. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that I know it will get me to come back. Somehow, I know I'll end up back in those woods eventually. And this time, I don't think I'm getting out. I haven't told anyone this yet, and I probably shouldn't be telling anyone now, but I can't keep living with this thing alone anymore. My name is Scott Hansen, and I've been a highway trooper in Oklahoma for almost 18 years. I patrol Interstate 40 primarily, and I've seen a lot of bad stuff on that stretch of road. Accidents, drug busts, suicides, you name it. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what's been happening to me since that night in May. We got a call about a motorcycle collision near mile marker 139, and I responded like I do to every other accident. Standard procedure, you know? Get there, assess the scene, secure it, call for medical if needed. But this one was different from the moment I arrived. There was a 23-year-old kid named David Reeves lying on the pavement with a broken collarbone and a busted-up leg, and he was absolutely frantic. Panic attack level frantic. He was bleeding and in pain, but what he cared about most was screaming. My passenger. My passenger. Where's Sarah? She was with me. Sarah fell off. I'm trying to calm him down, trying to do my job, but he's insistent. He swears his girlfriend was on the back of his bike, that she hit the pavement before he did. So we searched. We searched that entire stretch of highway with multiple units, with flashlights, with everything we had. There was nothing. No body, no second helmet, no evidence that anyone else had even been involved in that accident. Just David and his totaled motorcycle. But this kid, even as the paramedics were loading him up and his body was going into shock, he was still screaming about Sarah. He was still convinced she was out there somewhere, that we weren't looking hard enough. I filed the report as a single-vehicle motorcycle accident, no additional casualties. But something about it stuck with me all through the night. The next morning, I went down to the dispatch office and pulled the highway camera footage from that intersection. I wanted to see if maybe I'd missed something, if maybe there really had been another person involved that we just couldn't find. But when I watched that footage, it made my blood go cold. David Reeves was completely alone on that motorcycle. Completely alone. The bike was empty behind him, no passenger, nobody. But here's the thing that got to me. He was moving his head like he was talking to someone. He was gesturing with his left hand like he was pointing things out or having an active conversation. His body language made it absolutely clear that he believed there was someone there with him. But there wasn't. There was just empty air. I watched that footage like 10 times, and each time it was the same. Alone. Just David and the road, and whatever he thought he was carrying. I started getting that feeling, that feeling like I was touching something I shouldn't be touching, like I was pulling on a thread that would unravel something dark. But I was curious now. I had to know what was going on. So the next day, I drove out to the hospital where they'd taken David and asked if I could interview him formally. He was in recovery, doped up on painkillers, but he was coherent enough to talk. And he gave me details, man. He described his girlfriend Sarah in perfect detail. Brunette, 5'4", had this little scar on her left cheekbone, wore a specific pendant necklace. He said he'd picked her up from a rest stop about 2 miles before the accident, that she'd called him asking for a ride. He remembered exactly what she was wearing. A denim jacket and jeans. Black shoes. Everything specific and consistent. This kid was not making it up. He genuinely believed Sarah had been there. While David was talking to me, giving me all these details about this girl who didn't exist, I wasn't really paying full attention because something else had caught my eye. There was a mirror on the wall next to the hospital sink, and in that mirror, behind David's head, I could see a silhouette. A female silhouette with long dark hair that was wet and seemed to be dripping. The figure was standing directly behind David, head bowed, completely still. I felt my heart start racing. I looked away from the mirror and turned around physically to look at where that figure should have been. Nothing. Completely empty. No one standing there. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there. Still in the exact same position, head down, that dark hair just falling. I know how this sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But I saw it. I saw her. And she was looking at me through that mirror. Not directly at me, her head was still down, but I could feel the attention, the awareness that she knew I could see her. I excused myself and left David's hospital room. I needed air. I needed to process what the hell I had just experienced. I'd been a cop for 18 years. I didn't believe in ghosts. But that thing in the mirror, that wasn't a reflection, wasn't my imagination. It was there. That night, I got back in my patrol car after finishing my shift, and I felt it immediately. This weight. This presence on the passenger seat next to me. The seat felt heavy, like someone was sitting there, even though it was completely empty when I looked. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, lack of sleep, my mind playing tricks on me. I pulled out onto I-40 and started driving my usual route, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I could feel her presence just sitting there, silently waiting. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned my head and looked directly at the passenger seat. Empty air. But then I glanced at my rearview mirror, the interior mirror mounted on my windshield, and in that reflection, I could see her clearly. The silhouette of a woman, head slightly turned, that long dark hair, just sitting there in my passenger seat. Looking at me. Waiting. I swerved the car almost into the shoulder. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep control. I looked back at the mirror, and she was still there. Every time I glance at that rearview mirror, she's there. Every single time. And it's getting more detailed. I can see more of her now. The edges of her face are becoming clearer. Her features are starting to sharpen. The denim jacket. The black shoes. She's becoming more solid, more real, like she's gaining strength or anchoring herself to reality through me. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was nothing, but it's been 3 months now, and she's still here. Still in my passenger seat. Still watching. I finally went back to the hospital a week ago, and I talked to David Reeves one more time. I asked him point blank if he felt any different, if he felt lighter somehow after the accident. He looked at me with this smile I'd never seen before. A calm smile. Peaceful. Almost relieved. He said, "Yeah, actually. It's like the weight is gone, you know? Like something that was holding me down just lifted off." That's when I knew what had happened. David had picked up something on that road, something that needed a ride, something that had been waiting on that stretch of highway. And when I saw it, when I acknowledged it and made eye contact with it through that mirror, it transferred. It left David, and it came to me. Now she rides with me every night on I-40. I can't see her if I look directly at the seat. I can only see her in reflections, mirrors, windows, puddles, anything with a surface. And each time I see her, she's getting clearer. Her features are becoming more defined. I can almost make out her face now. She's patient. She's not angry or violent. She just sits there quietly waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. Maybe waiting to become real. Maybe waiting for me to look in a mirror at the exact moment she's solid enough to reach through. I've started avoiding reflective surfaces in my car. I've put tape over my rearview mirror. I've stopped using the bathroom at the station because the mirrors there are too clear. But I know it's only a matter of time. She's gaining strength every day, and soon, very soon, she won't need a reflection to be seen. She'll be solid enough to touch the steering wheel, to tap my shoulder, to sit up next to me in the passenger seat for real. And I have no idea what happens then. All I know is that David is living his life free and clear, and I'm the one carrying her now. She's riding with me, night after night on Interstate 40, waiting for the moment when she can finally be more than just a reflection. And that moment is coming. My name is Detective Mike Garrison, and I've been working homicide and missing persons for the Plains County Sheriff's Office in Texas for nearly 2 decades. I've investigated murders, kidnappings, human trafficking rings, all the worst humanity has to offer. But nothing in all my years of police work prepared me for what started happening at St. Jude Farm about 4 months ago. It began with a kid. Peter Morrison, 8 years old, went missing from the farm where his parents worked as seasonal laborers. We searched for days, dogs, volunteers, helicopters, everything. Then came another child. Renee Chun, 7 years old, vanished from the same property within a week. 2 kids from the same location isn't a coincidence, so I knew we were dealing with something deliberate, something planned. The farm sits on this massive expanse of empty land, mostly abandoned nowadays, but there's this old grain silo in the middle of it. Massive thing, probably 50 feet tall, made of corrugated metal and concrete. It's been there since the 70s, maybe longer. It should have been demolished years ago, but the owner never got around to it, so it just sits there, rotting away in the Texas heat. That's where I thought the kids might be. That's where everything pointed to. So I called my partner, Inspector Daniel Nolan, and we headed out there to check it out. I've worked with Nolan for 6 years, solid cop, methodical, doesn't let emotions cloud his judgment. But I should have known something was wrong when he didn't want to go down into that silo. He kept saying we should wait for backup, that it was unsafe, that maybe we should call the structural engineers first. But we had 2 missing children, so I convinced him we had to go now. That was probably the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. We descended into that silo with flashlights and audio recording equipment because the space was so massive and the echo was so unpredictable that we thought audio analysis might help us locate anything the kids might have left behind. The inside of that silo was like descending into hell itself. It was dark and cold, and the air felt thick and wrong. There was this smell, not rot exactly, but like something organic breaking down, grain fermenting and decomposing at the same time. The bottom of the silo was covered in this layer of dust maybe 6 inches thick, undisturbed for years probably. But as we moved our flashlights around, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Small footprints. Child-sized. Both of them led to one spot on the wall, and at that spot, there was a hole. A hole that looked fresh cut, like concrete, that had been broken away very recently. The edges were still sharp, not weathered, and the hole didn't lead anywhere visible. It was like it had been carved into solid concrete with no purpose, just a void. We set up our audio equipment and started recording, hoping to capture any sounds or vibrations that might indicate someone was down there, trapped somewhere deeper. What came back through those speakers wasn't an echo. It was a murmur. A slow, dragging murmur that sounded almost like whispering, and it transformed. That's the only word for it. Transformed into children's voices. High-pitched, thin, coming from what sounded like miles underground. The voices were saying names. Peter, Renee, Peter, Renee. Over and over, like a chant, like a song, like whatever was down there was rehearsing these names, burning them into the stone itself. Nolan grabbed my arm so hard, he was cutting off the blood flow. His face was absolutely pale, and I could feel him shaking. The murmur kept going, kept morphing, and then it formed words, actual English words. 3 words, each one stretched out and distorted, coming from the depths of the earth. Nolan, Nolan, Nolan. My partner's name. The voice was calling his name. Nolan made a sound like an animal being gutted, this whimper that didn't even sound human. He kept backing away from the speaker, backing toward the ladder, his eyes wide and unblinking. That thing, it knows my name, he kept saying. How does it know my name? How does it know my goddamn name? I was trying to keep my composure, trying to think like a detective, trying to process what we were experiencing through a logical lens. But there was nothing logical about any of this. That voice, that presence, whatever was down there in that hole in the concrete, it had just called Nolan by name. It had reached up through however many feet of earth and stone, and spoken his name like it was introducing itself. Nolan didn't wait for me. He bolted. He literally threw the audio equipment at me and ran toward the ladder, climbing like his life depended on it. I followed him, but he was already at the top and heading for the exit before I even reached the ladder. We got out of that silo, and neither of us said a word on the drive back to the station. Nolan was shaking the entire time, gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. The next morning, I went to follow up with Nolan at the precinct, and he wasn't there. I called his house, no answer. I drove over to his place, and the door was unlocked. The inside of his home was normal, nothing disturbed, but on the kitchen wall, written in white chalk, was a single line. "The earth keeps the names." That was all. Just that one sentence. Nolan was gone. We filed a missing persons report for him, but we all knew something had happened at that silo. Something had called him by name, and something had convinced him that the only way to escape was to disappear completely. I never found him, never heard from him again, but I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just walk away from this. So I went back to that silo, alone. I know how stupid that sounds, but I had to go back. I had to know what we were dealing with. I brought professional equipment this time, ground-penetrating radar, seismic sensors, the whole package. I set everything up around that hole in the concrete, and I waited. The sensors started picking up movement beneath the ground. Not one source of movement, but multiple. Multiple things moving beneath the concrete, moving toward my position. And then the voice came again. Not through speakers this time. Not from the audio equipment. It came from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. It said one thing, just 4 words, and it said them in a voice that sounded like my own voice, like something was mimicking me perfectly. "Mike, you are marked." That's when I ran. I didn't care about professionalism or evidence or any of that. I ran out of that silo like it was on fire, and I didn't stop running until I was miles away. That was 3 months ago, and things have been getting progressively worse. The water coming out of my kitchen sink smells like rotting grain. There's this sour, fermenting smell that no amount of bleach will get rid of. My bathroom mirror developed a stain of moisture, like damp, like something is seeping through from the other side of the wall. And the stain grows every day. It spreads across the mirror like a mold, but it's not mold, it's something else. Something with intention. I hear sounds sometimes, late at night, coming from the walls. Murmurs that sound like distant voices calling my name. Just Mike, over and over, stretched out and distorted. I've had the house inspected. Nothing. Structurally sound. No leaks, no moisture problems, no mold. Everything checks out. But I know what's happening. That thing at the silo marked me. It said my name, which means it knows me now. It knows where I live. It knows how to reach me. And I can feel it getting closer. I can feel the pull, like gravity working in reverse, like something underneath the earth is slowly dragging me downward. I've applied for a transfer. I've been seeing a psychologist. I've taken every precaution I can think of. But nothing stops it. Nothing prevents it. Peter and Renee are still down there, in that hole, or past that hole, in whatever space exists beneath that silo. And Nolan, God knows what happened to Nolan. Maybe he found them. Maybe he went to them voluntarily to escape the call. Or maybe he's still down there, still calling his own name over and over until the earth remembers it so well that he becomes part of it. All I know is that the stain on my mirror is growing, and the sounds are getting louder, and one night very soon, when I look in that mirror, I won't be looking back at myself. I'll be looking at something else. Something that wears my face. Something that knows my name, because it's been rehearsing it in the dark for 3 months. The earth is patient. The earth is hungry. And I've been marked. I'm Sergeant Alex Morrison with the U.S. Coast Guard, stationed at Cape Disappointment in Washington State. For those who don't know, Cape Disappointment is where the Pacific Ocean meets the Columbia River, and it's one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the entire West Coast. Hundreds of ships have wrecked there over the centuries. We call it the graveyard of the Pacific for a reason. I've been working this post for 12 years, and I've seen things that would make most people's blood run cold. But what happened on that October night, I still can't fully explain it, and I've been trying to for nearly 5 months now. We got a distress call about the lighthouse keeper at Cape Disappointment not responding to radio checks. The weather had turned bad, like it does out there, and a thick fog rolled in around 6 in the evening. Not just any fog, the kind of fog that seems to have weight and intention, that absorbs light and sound, and makes you feel like you're suffocating even though you're standing outside. I grabbed Corporal David Jones, one of my best men, and we headed out to check on the keeper. Jones had worked with me for 4 years, solid guy, no nonsense, always calm under pressure. We took our patrol boat out and made it to the lighthouse through the fog, though it felt like it took twice as long as usual. The visibility was maybe 10 feet at best. Everything beyond, that was just gray nothingness. We secured the boat and approached the lighthouse on foot, and that's when things started getting weird. We found the lighthouse keeper missing, but there was no sign of struggle or distress. The door was unlocked, his coffee was still warm on the desk, and his radio was functioning normally. It was like he'd just vanished in the middle of his shift. We started searching the grounds, looking for any sign of where he might have gone. That's when we noticed the footprints in the sand. But these weren't normal footprints. They were shallow, barely pressing into the sand at all, like whoever made them weighed almost nothing. And they led from the lighthouse down toward the beach, toward the fog and the water beyond. Jones was in front of me, scanning the sand with his flashlight, pointing out each print as we followed them. The fog was getting thicker, and I couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. The sound of the ocean was muted, like the fog was swallowing it. And then Jones stopped dead. He held up his hand, and I stopped too. That's when I heard it, this high-pitched whistling sound, like something between wind and a human whistle, but not quite either. It was coming from somewhere in the fog, but I couldn't tell from which direction. The sound seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was vibrating inside my ears, inside my skull, like it was trying to get into my head. Jones was staring into the fog, completely motionless, his jaw clenched. "That's the call," he whispered, his voice shaking. "That's the calling. Do you hear it?" I told him to stay calm, to stick with me, but he wasn't really hearing me anymore. His eyes were fixed on the gray nothingness in front of us, and I could see something changing in his expression. Fear was being replaced by something else. Something like hunger, like longing. He broke away from me and started running toward the sound. I grabbed his shoulder and yanked him back, pulling him toward me with all the strength I had. "We're leaving," I said. "We're getting out of here right now." But even as I said it, I could feel something wrong about the situation. The fog seemed to be pressing in, closer than before, and I couldn't see the lighthouse anymore. I couldn't even see the way we'd come. We were completely turned around. That's when our radio came to life. Neither of us had touched it. It just crackled and activated on its own, and a voice came through. Not the normal dispatcher voice we were used to hearing. This was distorted, somehow deeper and older, like it was being transmitted from very far away. The voice said, "No one leaves without leaving something behind." Just that one sentence, and then static. Jones made a sound I'll never forget, this whimper that turned into a kind of laugh. He pulled himself out of my grip, and I'm not exaggerating when I say he was stronger than he should have been. His eyes were completely black now, just solid black where the whites should have been. And his mouth was moving, but nothing was coming out. He was trying to scream, but no sound was emerging. He took 3 steps toward the fog, toward the sound of that whistling, and I lunged for him. But the moment my hand closed on where his arm should have been, there was nothing. Just fog. Just empty air. I stumbled backward, and that's when I saw something that still doesn't make sense to me. There was a footprint in the sand behind me. A perfect military boot print, reversed. like someone had walked backward on only one foot, twisted completely around. And it was the only print visible in the sand now. All the prints from before, the shallow ones from the keeper, the ones we'd made walking down, they were all gone. Just that one reversed print, standing alone in the sand like a warning. I heard the whistling sound get louder, and I heard Jones's voice calling from inside the fog. But it wasn't a cry for help. His voice sounded calm, relieved, like he was welcoming something, like the pressure that had been on him his whole life had finally lifted. I didn't think. I just ran. I ran through the fog, completely disoriented, running in what I hoped was the direction of the lighthouse. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I kept calling out to identify my location, trying to get my bearings. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, the lighthouse appeared out of the fog like a ghost ship emerging from the water. I made it back to the boat and got out of there. I didn't look back. I radioed it in immediately. Coast Guard search and rescue teams were deployed, but they found nothing. No Jones, no keeper, no trace that anyone had ever been there except for me. They found my boot prints leading down to the beach and back, but nothing else. It was like the fog had erased every trace of Jones's existence. The official investigation concluded that Jones had suffered some kind of psychological break and likely walked into the ocean during our search. They classified it as a probable drowning, gave me a commendation for trying to save him, and told me to take time off to deal with the trauma. I took 3 weeks, saw a psychiatrist, and did everything I was supposed to do. I came back to work, and I thought maybe I could move past this. But I can't, because something came back with me from that fog. Every time fog rolls in over the coast, I feel it. I hear that whistling sound in my head, not with my ears, but inside my mind. And the radio, it started doing things. Late at night, when I'm alone at my desk, it activates on its own, and I hear static mixed with Jones's voice. Not asking for help or trying to communicate. Just saying his own name over and over, like he's making sure he's not forgotten. Like the fog is making sure he's remembered. I know how this sounds. I know I sound like a man who's losing his grip on reality. But I'm telling you the truth. The fog at Cape Disappointment isn't just weather. It's something alive. It's something that takes things, and when it takes something, it leaves something behind to mark the exchange. I survived because I ran. But Jones stayed because something was calling to him. Something he couldn't refuse. And now that thing, that entity or presence, or whatever you want to call it, it's marked me as a witness. I don't know how long it's going to wait before it decides to collect on that. I don't know if I'll be next, or if it'll take someone else I care about to balance the scales. All I know is that I can't leave Cape Disappointment. I've applied for transfers 3 times, and every single time, I've backed out of them. Because I know that if I'm not here when the fog rolls in, if I'm not here to remember Jones, then something worse is going to happen. The fog needs witnesses. The fog needs people to know what happened, so it can happen again. I'm trapped here, serving as a monument to the night the Pacific Ocean gave nothing back, but took everything from a good man. Listen, I'm not a guy who does this kind of thing, alright? I've been a detective in Chicago's homicide unit for 18 years. 18 years. I've seen bodies, I've seen crime scenes that would make your stomach turn inside out, but I've never, and I mean never, talked about something like this publicly. The case got filed away under accidental death by prolonged exposure, but that's bullshit, and deep down, the higher-ups knew it. What I'm about to tell you, it's gonna sound insane. It's gonna sound like I'm some kind of crazy person making stuff up for attention. But I'm not. I was there. I saw it happen. And I need you to understand that whatever you think you know about how the world works, about what's possible and what isn't, you gotta throw all that out the window right now. Because in the winter of 2017, in a warehouse in Pullman on the south side, something took a man's life, and we had no way to stop it. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, real cold, like -10 degrees Fahrenheit cold. We got word that a body was found in an abandoned warehouse down in Pullman, which is already sketchy as hell even in the daytime. Guy's name was Elias Vance, 60 years old, some kind of reclusive art collector, and he'd been missing for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. When we got there, the maintenance crew who found him was basically having a breakdown. The body was stripped down, completely naked, laid out on this spiral pattern made of drywood shavings. And here's where it gets weird, and I mean weird in a way you can't explain away. The warehouse was freezing, man. And I'm not just talking about it being cold outside. The actual temperature inside that specific room, even though it's underground with all these insulation materials, felt like we were walking into a freezer. I've been in cold environments before, but this was different. This was the kind of cold that doesn't feel natural, you know? It felt intentional, designed. Our thermometer read like 45 degrees inside, but it felt like we were at absolute zero. Your lungs hurt, your eyes watered. And Dr. Owens, our medical examiner, he just shook his head and said it was hyperthermia. But even he couldn't explain why the guy's body looked like it had been in there for months, not 3 weeks. The only thing we found next to the body was a music box. Not some cheap knockoff from a department store. This was handcrafted, dark wood, real intricate carving work, with a bronze handle and everything. It was completely pristine, untouched by the damp or the decay or anything. Just sitting there like it was placed deliberately. Owens bagged it, tagged it, sealed it up in plastic evidence containers. Standard procedure. I remember looking at it though, and something in my gut, that detective's instinct you develop after nearly 2 decades, something was screaming at me that this wasn't just some random object left at a crime scene. This meant something. This was connected to what happened to Elias. I didn't tell anybody though, because what am I gonna say? Hey guys, this music box is giving me a weird feeling. They'd have pulled me off the case and sent me to see a shrink. So I kept my mouth shut and filed the evidence like we're supposed to. 2 nights later, I'm at my desk going through Elias's financial records, trying to see if there's some motive, some reason someone would want him dead. It's like 2 in the morning, and the office is basically empty except for Officer Lopez down at the front desk. That's when I hear it. Not loud, not obvious, but this soft mechanical sound. A melody. It sounds almost like something from a kid's toy, you know? Simple, high-pitched, kind of haunting the way old music boxes can be haunting. And it's coming from down the hallway, from the evidence room. I stand up, and my hands are literally shaking. I call Lopez, and when he comes down to my office, the guy is white as a ghost, literally pale. "Detective," he says, barely whispering. "That music box, it's playing. But nobody's been in that room. That room is locked." We both just stand there for a second, looking at each other, and I'm thinking, no way. This is not happening. But we both heard it. We go down to the evidence room, and the overhead lights are making everything look clinical and wrong. We get to the Vance evidence container, and the music just stops. Completely. Dead silence. I lean my ear right up against the plastic seal, and there's nothing. Absolute nothing. So I tell Lopez to check the night vision footage from the camera in that room. He pulls up the recording, and here's where things go from weird to genuinely terrifying. There are gaps in the footage. Whole chunks of the recording, like from 1:55 a.m. to 2:10 a.m., just gone or glitched out. But in the parts where we can see clearly, the music box isn't where we left it. It's on the floor. The lid is open slightly. Then the footage just cuts out, and when it comes back, the box is back on the shelf, sealed in its container, in the exact same position. I'm standing there watching this, and I feel like I'm gonna throw up. Lopez won't even look at me. We don't talk about it. We just walk out of that room. The next morning, we go to process the music box at the lab, and I'm already preparing myself for this to be some kind of joke, some elaborate prank. But when we open up that evidence container, the plastic seal is still intact, but inside, on the bronze handle, there's something new. Something that wasn't there before. Engraved into the metal, small but deliberate. "Now he sings." That's it. 4 words. And I remember thinking about Elias, lying there in that spiral of wood shavings, and what he sings could possibly mean. The FBI didn't want anything to do with it. Owens couldn't explain the condensation that was somehow inside a sealed container. Nobody wanted to touch this case anymore, so it got filed away. I took medical leave. I still can't listen to wind chimes or any kind of music box without feeling like my stomach is gonna drop, because I know what really happened in that warehouse. I know what really killed Elias Vance. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't exposure. It was the music. It sang him to death.